Today's online micro conference, brought to you by Housing Digital. I'm today's chair, Joe Broon. I'm the managing director of Housing Digital. We are looking at the digital golden thread and asset compliance with a focus on OAB's law. Over the next 2 hours, we're going to explore one of the most urgent challenges facing the housing sector right now. How landlords build and maintain digital golden thread of safety information while meeting the increasingly rigorous requirements of the Building Safety Act and the new expectations emerging around OAB's law. This session has been designed to be practical and solution focused. We'll hear from sector leaders about what is working, what isn't, and how organisations are beginning to digitise safety information, manage compliance data, and create verifiable evidence trails that stand up to regulatory scrutiny. We'll also look at real-world impact on tenants, supported by the latest research and insights. So thank you all for joining us. I'm delighted to welcome John Wickenden, who is the research manager at Housemark, where he leads analysis into the performance of the UK social housing sector. He works with data from housing providers right across the country. John helps turn complex benchmarking and operational data into clear insights that support better decision-making and performance improvement across the sector. So please join me in welcoming John Wickenden from Housemark.
Okay, thank you. So, so I'm going to talk about OAB's law. So what we've been doing at Housemark is we started to collect data on it. So I'm just going to run through some of those results just to give you an idea about our early observations. Just a bit about Housemark. We capture 3,500 data sets regularly across the year. We work with the regulator, MHCLG in this case as well for our OAB's law across the UK, Housing Ombudsman as well, to help capture what the sector needs in terms of data and try and understand where it is and feed that back and get an idea about where the sector's going. We are owned by the Chartered Institute of Housing and National Housing Federation, so we all work together for the benefit of the sector. Okay, so OAB's law. We introduced it to our monthly pulse data set back in November. So we captured the first full month of data after phase one went live. And it's been a bit of a mixed bag, really. So we've got the process there that's, if anyone's tried to sort of wade through the MHCLG guidance, they'll know that it kind of flips around all over the place. And if you want to find out how many different types of investigation there are, you have to look under a particular type of investigation. And at the bottom of that, there's a little diagram that tells you. There's also a flow chart that kind of goes here, there, and everywhere. Maybe we need to get someone from Orbit onto that and sort of make it a bit more simple. But then I look at the actual underlying secondary legislation as it is that sits beneath it, and it's not much better. It's not much easier to understand. The officials at the MHCLG have done their best to try and make it a simple process to follow, but it kind of isn't. The regulations have been written by lawyers. They're thinking about, well, what happens? What's the kind of the route that a tenant would need to take to get redress from the landlord to fix this issue and ultimately go to court. So it allows certain safeguards in there, what I call get out clauses, to the landlord to sort of say, okay, well, there's a judgment call that's needed here. And that makes things like measurement really difficult because you want it to be this or that. Whereas this is saying, well, it could be one, it could be the other. And they're kind of the challenges that we're facing, but also the challenges that landlords are facing, landlords that we talk to when they're trying to measure OAB's law. So we've got certain issues that I flagged up here. So they've got triage. It's come up in this call already. There's no sort of standardized process for identifying a potential hazard. And there's quite a lot of it's kind of been up to landlords to decide and make it up for themselves. And I think there's definitely an opportunity to share some information there. It was interesting to hear from OMFACS about that. Be interesting to see if there are other providers that can um, deal with that initial process when you've got a non-technical person taking a call, trying to identify whether there's a potential hazard. If it is a hazard, what type of hazard is it, and how severe is the effect on the tenant? So at the moment, we're in a kind of bit of a wild west, and nobody really seems to know exactly what they're doing outside one or two landlords that I've spoken to. Um, got this terminology. So investigation, four different types. They've all got different time scales. One of the time scales is as soon as reasonably practicable. So how do you measure that? How do you know whether you're doing well? How do you know what's normal when you're looking at a time scale that isn't a time scale? We've got this mix and match of working days and calendar days. So some of the targets that are set through the legislation are working days. Some are 24 hours calendar, and some are 12 weeks, which is presumably 12 calendar weeks. So we've got to try and sort of work our way through that. And it just adds to the number of data points, the number of calculations that you need if you're trying to set targets. And then you've got different work items with identical target times. So really, really tricky to try and sort of wade your way through and identify what you need to collect, and then how that flows through into a case to identify whether it has met those target times. And I won't even go to clock resets because I haven't got the time. But there is a whole process there where if the tenant doesn't like what you said in your 3 working day summary, that you can go and do a separate follow-up investigation that sort of resets the clock, and you've got the 10 working days. How do you put that into a workflow? It's mind-boggling, but we can help at Housemark. We've got various products and services that we can work with you to identify the issues, and using the scope that we have from our benchmarking, we can see what's looking good in the sector and where that needs to go. So just some of the results that we've got in the first 3 months of data. One of the biggest issues I found is with emergency hazards. So they're just not enough of them being recorded. It says quite clearly in the guidance that emergency hazards are probably the same as emergency repairs. So we said, okay, well, how many emergency repairs are there? We know that's in the TSMs. So if you divide that by 12, you get around 64, 65, let's say, emergency repairs per month. But you've got a wider range there. So if you've got between 20 and 100 emergency responsive repairs per month, whereas you can see the actual numbers that landlords are recording for emergency hazards are way lower. When we do our validations, we check outlying data, and it tends to come back that, oh, the only emergency hazards we're recording for Awaab's law are for damp and mold. And we're saying, well, phase 1 is all emergency hazards. And I've seen jaws drop when I've been on calls with customers about that, to say, no, it actually includes all of them. So you've got to think about hygiene, you've got to think about falls from height, you've got to think about all of them for that. And there's a comparatively small number of landlords that actually have what I would consider to be the full set of data there. So that's something where we really need to get that across. It's also, I noticed this week, the updated TSM guidance, it actually says emergency repairs that you're recording for your TSMs in RP02 should be about the same as the emergency hazards that you're recording for Awaab's law. So it is actually creeping into regulation now for English landlords. On the slightly better note, once we find a hazard is in the system, it's comparatively easy to say, well, have you met those timescales? So where you've put them in, you said, okay, let's see if we've actually met those, 10 working days, 5 working days. We're actually seeing more normal results that are like what we see for other responsive repairs. But even though we're not sure that the data coming in is correctly identified in line with Awaab's law, we still want to collect it. We're in a phase at the moment, so the MHCLG call it test and learn, and we're in a test and learn phase with the data we're collecting on volumes and in target response times. We want to know, even if it's the good, the bad, the ugly type results that you've got, because it all helps to increase our understanding of where Awaab's law is going. So yeah, just some of the results that we've got in there. Looking at those, I've just included those on the slide, so you can look at those and get an idea about where we see different types of hazards covered by our Awaab's law measures. Looking at November, December, comparing there with percentage of emergency hazards resolved within 24 hours, and then we've got some January data in there just to give you an idea about um, the investigations completed within 10 working days. Okay, I think that's just about 10 minutes for me. So are there any questions?
Thank you, John. Um, Thank you for a very insightful presentation and very punctual on the time there, John. So thank you for that. Have we got any? Can you just stop sharing your screen for us, John,
Sure,
so I
yeah.
can see if anyone else got their hand raised? Mr. Cantrell, what is your question, please?
Hi, it's Mark Cantrell again, editor of Housing Digital. Listen, there, it seems like you're dealing with a really confusing situation. I know you discussed this, but kind of like not quite clarified in my head. There's a lot of this confusion born of imprecise definitions from MHCLG and the relevant
Um,
legislation.
yes. Well, there's an element of that. The guidance that MHT. I mean, I'd be interested to see if there's any comments for anyone that's sort of read the guidance and is confident about it. It's not particularly easy to follow. In some ways, the secondary legislation is difficult to follow. It's been written by a lawyer. It's not been written by a housing performance expert. So they haven't sort of thought about how we're going to count things in this. But then also, maybe because of the size and scope of the guidance, I don't think it's been read in detail by as many people working for landlords as needs to be.
Yeah. I mean, how, how does this affect gathering data? I mean, if you don't really, I mean, like you mentioned a few points in your presentation, but how are you supposed to make sense of it if your terms aren't clearly defined and you're trying to gather data on that and it's, well, what am I measuring? Where am I going with
Yeah.
this? Where does the picture,
Well,
how can you
I mean,
fulfill Awaab's law in that situation?
exactly. I mean, in some ways, you think, well, the HHSRS hazards have been around for over 20 years, so someone should be familiar with those at individual landlords. Landlords are quite familiar with the concept of recording defects or reports of defects from tenants and then going out and fixing those defects and adhering to timescales. They've all been in place for many, many years. It's just a new mechanism of doing that with new target timescales and new ways of actually um, identifying those sort of linking the hazards through to the timescales. It's the kind of the administration of it that's difficult rather than the actual going out and doing the work. I feel.
It's basically like part of the learning curve sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's not unusual for there to be a sort of bedding in period for KPIs. We noticed it when the Housing Ombudsman released its complaint handling code. Complaints records, complaint volumes were kind of all over the place for best part of a year, really, while landlords transitioned from having informal and formal complaints to actually understanding no, you can't have informal complaints. You just need formal complaints. So there is a kind of bedding in period. It also perhaps didn't help that MHCLG released the guidance really quite soon before it went live as well. There wasn't much time for landlords to kind of get to grips with it, set up systems. We did some research in the autumn that with Pennington Choices that found about 1 in 10 landlords felt confident they were ready for Awaab's law to go live in their organisation.
Thanks for that.
Thanks, Mark. Danny.
It was good. Yeah, it was just maybe rhetorical points, but more to follow on. I think it's interesting. It's definitely legal speak in terms of it. It's even got sort of mold wash in there that anyone worth anything wouldn't put mold wash as what we try and do. It doesn't really mitigate that much because it's not an effective treatment and it will only come back. But I guess I found it interesting when we spoke about the um, emergency repairs piece, and I think it's important to remember that ours always emergency hazards, and all emergency repairs aren't necessarily doesn't meet the threshold to be an emergency hazard, and all Cat ones aren't emergency hazards aren't emergencies, but all emergency hazards are Cat one. So again, it just adds to the complexity of something that should be so simple to understand, and we've overcomplicated the life out of it. But no, it's just a rhetorical point.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. It's quite difficult to think of emergency repairs that aren't emergency hazards, but there are emergency hazards that you wouldn't consider to be emergency repairs. So I'm
You
trying to
could
think.
have, or you could have, like, say, a broken window could be a broken window lock could be an emergency repair, but it might not be an emergency hazard per se.
So
You could have,
security.
yeah, yeah, no, I don't necessarily disagree, but would it meet the threshold to do it on 24 hours for all of the things like that? I think I could probably find a few that aren't. So I think
Yes,
it's more,
there's not too many. Yeah, I mean, I'm
no, no,
thinking
no, no,
rural
no. I just
areas, but yeah.
Yeah. My point is more. I think that again, the difference between the two, it's created more confusion into that. And I think we only use that because we've got a tried and tested way of dealing with that, rather than that's what we should be doing. We actually, in the sector, the one thing we do well, because we almost by default turn it into an emergency service, is deal with emergency repairs. That doesn't necessarily mean we're dealing with emergency hazards.
Yes, and it's the kind of the connection between hazards and the effects of hazards on the tenants themselves,
Yeah.
and that sort of makes it an emergency in some cases as well. And yeah, it's I think that's probably where a lot of the lack of understanding is coming in. But having said that, we would still expect there to be quite a lot of crossover between emergency repairs and emergency hazards.
Yeah.
Okay. We do have a couple more questions in the chat. Vince House says he's got a question regarding ventilation. Question regarding ventilation. Often visit properties where systems are meeting Part F building regulations, but that isn't enough to deal with the moisture being produced in the property, mainly because of higher occupancy. How will Arab's law view this scenario where building regulations are being met, but it's not enough?
I'm just looking at it. So it meets, but still, it's either a hazard or it's not a hazard. I suppose there's I mean, there. For example, when I worked for a housing association many years ago, and there was damp and mold in the top floor of the block of flats, and it had just been built. It was brand new, and there were no roof leaks. And then what was actually happening is that building regulations had said they need to have, I think it was an aluminium membrane in the roof there. That's what was happening. Moisture was coming up through the building, condensating on the aluminium membrane, and then dropping down into the top floor of the flats below. So it was meeting building regulations, but it wasn't it wasn't there. So I don't think it necessarily matters. I doubt it would be a defence if it came to court that we've met building regulations. Building regulations probably haven't been designed to deal with the throughput of hazards coming through Awaab's law.
Okay. James Barnes has got a question. Can I have the clarification on 24 hours? Are people measuring to 24 hours between the issue being identified to make safe being completed or to the operative being on site? That is, they may arrive within 24 hours, but the job may not be completed, but the job may not be completed within that time. Say arrive at hour 23, complete in hour 24, so over 24
Yeah.
hours basically.
Yeah, so the Arab's law, as it stands at the moment, you are required, and England, let's say, you are required to do the investigation and the make safe within 24 hours of the hazard being recorded. I think the actual wording is being brought to the landlord's attention. So that's where that's the starting point of 24 hours. In Wales, when it comes out, Arab's law will be 24 hours to do the investigation and then 24 hours from the investigation concluding to the make safe.
Okay. Penny Best at Golding Homes is currently building metrics to match Housemarque's KPIs and asks, interesting point made earlier about the services linking up with the example of an emergency repair being raised due to a broken window, which should also trigger an excessive cold HHSRH case. When reporting on this, does this count as one or two emergency hazards?
Yeah, so if you're just counting, I mean, I'm inclined to be. I've been counting it as the hazard on a per property basis. So there might be two hazards. This is a bit like with antisocial behaviour, where you have lots of different incidents that form a particular case. So I think you've got to need to sort of think about it like that, or with a complaint where you have one complaint, but there may be lots of different parts to it. So it's or even a repairs works order where you might have a works order, but then beneath that you've got several sort of schedule of rate codes kind of coming in, and you need some kind of differentiation to say, okay, this is what we've got in a particular case level, and then beneath that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 hazards or whatever that are identified, and there could be a mix of significance and emergency. But yeah, we're still at the kind of early stages of understanding how that can be put together.
Yeah. Finally, Sally Skipworth Cook makes a point about overcrowding. Is overcrowding covered under Arab's law? If not, obviously the issues arising from overcrowding would be covered through Arab's law. Can you clarify on that?
Yeah, so my understanding is that overcrowding as a hazard is not included in Awab's law. But you're right. Yeah, the hazards that are created as a result of overcrowding. So yeah, for example, maybe additional moisture from more people breathing in the property could result in hazards being present.
And then finally from me, John, just going back to a more tech side of things. Obviously, you're only as good as your data, as we often hear said over and over again. Given the data quality issues you've identified during this test and learn phase, what do you think are the most critical improvements landlords need to make in the near future, the next quarter, for instance, to ensure the data becomes reliable enough to genuinely inform sector-wide practice, or at least a start?
I think having a clear understanding of what Arab's law is trying to do, and maybe looking at it on a case by case basis and looking at the throughput and the individual data points that you need to progress a case from it coming into you being made aware of it right through to the hazard being resolved, and thinking about individual cases, because that's how the guidance, the legislation has been developed, and then thinking about how you scale it up, aggregate it, and look at it from a whole organization point of view.